Hey David,
Hello.
how's it going?
Not too bad.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a few easy questions about your involvement in the party and move on to a few more pointed ones about policy to do with youth engagement. I'm sure you're aware of what we do at Top Politics. We're a non-partisan think tank, and our goal is to get young people to the vote, promote press freedom, and generally try and solve the problems with apathy in Britain. So, to start with, how old were you when you started to get interested in politics?
Quite young. Politics has always been a big part of my family life. My dad grew up in Glasgow, so it's a die-hard Labour family. They've always been politically interested, but more Labour-leaning. In fact, my dad's brother-in-law stood against Ian Paisley for the Northern Irish Labour Party. My uncle is the secretary of the local SNP branch in the Inverness. So yeah, I've always sort of grown up around people that are interested in politics. So I was quite young. First proper foray, I was the election agent in the Aberdeenshire Inter-Schools mock election, which they run in conjunction with the council. Exactly the same way you do it properly. None of this shoebox passed around the class. Like they get the polling boxes in, they do it properly, and we have a proper count the next day as opposed to overnight. Counted more like a council election.
Excellent.
And where we were the only school to return a Liberal Democrat. The rest all went SNP.
Brilliant. Could you tell us a bit more about what made you join the Lib Dems and how you got involved in the party?
I think came to it, Lib Dem apple pie is how I sort of refer to it. If you read the party constitution, that's essentially everything that I've always been interested about. Civil liberties, human rights, which is a lot of what I focused on when I was at university here in Aberdeen. I've always felt that we're the party of sort of the little guy, very focused on communities, and particularly when you're from the northeast, you've got a very community mentality, particularly the further from the city you get, and that's what sort of led me to the party, and that would have been about sort of 2010, and our candidate in Aberdeen South, a guy called John Slee, was a former pupil of my school, so we met and started talking, and he asked me to help out with the campaign, and I've been knocking doors for the Liberals ever since.
Excellent. How do you feel as a young political candidate you could tackle political apathy and disillusionment, especially among young people?
I think a lot of the apathy is to do with not being able to see yourself in your politicians. Like the phrase that's often bandied around the Liberal Democrats is pale, male and stale. And I think that's sort of what you see, that's what people imagine, the white, middle-class, university-educated man in a suit, which I deliberately chose not to wear today, pontificating about things that young people don't particularly care about. So I think the start is more diverse candidates. It doesn't just have to be young. I think more diverse candidates so people can actually see themselves is a start. Actually, I think that links into what I was saying about John Slee. He was only 10 years older than me at that point. He was late 20s, early 30s. And that helped. I wasn't out campaigning for someone much older than me. So we sort of related to each other a bit more. I think there is also a sort of patronising nature to the way that we conduct politics, particularly because people are used to seeing the middle-aged man at the door, and told I look very young, and for some reason that invalidates my opinion. I think all opinion should be valued, particularly in an election like this, and I think regardless of where you fall on the question of Brexit, on the question of independence, this election, more than most, is about the future, and with that in mind, it's young people like myself, people younger than me, that are going to have to deal with the decisions we make now. So exercise the right to vote and influence it.
Excellent. At Talk Politics, we believe apathy is one of the greatest threats to democracy. Our manifesto, among other things, recommends automatic enrolment in the electoral register and an opt-out policy to ensure that anyone who wants to vote is able to do so without jumping through hoops. Do you agree, or if not, what measures do you think you could implement to help getting more young people to the polls?
I don't have any problem with the automatic enrolment. I don't see why that would pose any sort of problem. I become uncomfortable when that becomes like the system in Australia where you're fining people for not turning up. That creates abnormal behaviour. So automatic enrolment, I think, helps. Proper civic education, I think, is also something that's required. Like I mentioned before, the mock election where they did it properly, it wasn't made to feel like a farce, which I think sometimes it is. I studied election law when I was at university, and I always become very uncomfortable when people start talking about voting as sort of a consumer type enterprise. Whereas for me, it's a civic duty. It's something I should do, and though I've never spoiled my ballot, that I think that should include going down to the polling station and ruining it, or the active decision not to go. Though I would encourage spoiling your ballot because it gives me, as someone at the count, something more entertaining to read than a cross in a box. I think, the automatic enrolment that you mentioned sounds interesting, but I think it does come down to instilling in people that voting is something you need to do, because it's the thing on the doorstep that upsets me the most. You could be the most rude person of whatever party, including my own. I've had Liberals be rude to me too. That doesn't bother me. You can vote for any other party, at least you have an opinion. It's the people on the doorstep that say that you're all the same, it doesn't make a difference. The only way to change that is to exercise your right to vote. And I think it's sad that people don't think that changes things.
Brilliant, thanks David. How do you feel running against Alex Salmond, a seasoned politician, for the Gordon seat this June? How have things changed for you since 2015 when you ran the first time in Banff and Buchan?
Well, Banff and Buchan was nerve-wracking because it was up against the sitting MP, Ailey Whiteford, who privately is absolutely lovely, though we disagree about absolutely everything, and the late Alex Johnson, who had a reputation as being a bit of a bruiser, though one of the loveliest guys in politics I've ever had the fortune to meet, and he was incredibly supportive of me during that campaign. Salmond, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. I don't think being young, I don't think less experienced is the right word. I think sometimes being in politics for as long as he has, it's definitely a bubble. I think I bring something a bit fresh and new to it. Am I getting too partisan? Sorry. Bringing something a bit fresh and new to it. No, he doesn't scare me. No. Yeah, sorry, no, Salmond doesn't scare me. I look forward to the many meetings that we will have over the next few weeks.
Brilliant. Okay. What issues do you personally think young people in Scotland are worried about? What would you do to address them given the chance?
Well, when I went for my selection, I talked about, because we have ballots in the Liberal Democrats for our candidates, we don't appoint them. I discussed how, like I said earlier, that this election is very much about the future, and I talked about how even now, the future that I would want, I like the idea that I can move absolutely anywhere and work anywhere in Europe, travel freely, that I'm part of the UK, the EU, and a wider international spectrum of organisations working for the greater good. I think it was J.K. Rowling that said we live in the age of Hufflepuff. We're all nicey people. I think there is something to that, and that younger people like that idea, because we did vote to stay in both. So it sort of starts there. And then I think the Liberal Democrats and myself care quite a lot about mental health, which whenever we talk about it always seems to resonate quite well. I'm very concerned about provision up here, though I realise that's devolved. As an MP, I still think it's your role to lobby for you're there for your area, and that doesn't mean just sticking to devolved competences. Just because you can't legislate on something does not mean that you cannot throw your weight in behind a campaign. I think I'm particularly concerned that there's no, getting technical, tier 3 mental health beds north of Dundee. If you are a young person from Peterhead that needs to be committed to a young person's mental health ward, you've got to go to Dundee, and your family has to travel there, which I don't think it's good enough. I think we should be trying to do a lot more in that respect.
Okay. Do you have an opinion on the proposed Progressive Alliance?
As someone that supports electoral reform, I detest tactical voting, and I realise there is an element of hypocrisy here because I have encouraged people to do it, and I will admit it. But I think the problem then becomes that you end up with really weird scenarios. Well, you guarantee a two-party scenario. I know that's not how it's going to work with the Progressive Alliance, but then Labour and the Tories have the resources to outspend most other parties. So it then becomes a case, and you saw it after the coalition. The Tories realised they weren't going to pick up Labour votes, so they targeted Liberal voters, who are, annoyingly for me, the most likely to switch their vote between parties tactically. So, though in the short term it might reap progressive benefits, in the long term you are guaranteeing a two-party state, and that the party that you might habitually support might well not be there next time. I think that's a problem with first past the post.
Is there a particular voting system that you have a preference over?
I think we've become very comfortable with single transferable votes. It's my favourite by far. I would never argue that it was perfect. No voting system ever is, but particularly when people talk about the electoral system for the Scottish Parliament and how it's proportional, when the constituency element of that completely throws it, and when you get to the regions you end up with ridiculous scenarios where, like, the Highlands, the Northeast and the borders are so massive that you couldn't possibly hope for the regional MSPs to realistically represent their area. And then on the other hand you've got the constituency element of first past the post, which you end up with a dictatorship of a slightly larger minority. Single transferable vote counters the regional element of the Scottish Parliament with smaller areas. I think when people have the choice of who to go to as well, if you're in a perhaps slightly larger constituency with 4 MPs or 3 MPs or whatever, you can choose which of those you want to approach.
Excellent.
I think it gives people a lot more choice and a more realistic political picture across the UK.
Excellent. Do you have a politician or public figure from elsewhere in the political spectrum that you admire? What makes you admire them, if so?
don't make me pick a Tory. Ken Clarke. Largely because I think he's a liberal in disguise, but I think particularly in his later years he's been very open and honest about what he thinks, has been very happy to challenge the government, particularly around things that I care about, like the EU. And yes, I think that's part of the problem, and it's people that will challenge their party that I do sort of admire, because I've become very uncomfortable with the complete towing of the party line, and it has led to scenarios where people seem to have forgotten the area they represent and will just do as they're told. So yeah, people like Ken Clarke who will put their head above the parapet and stand up for themselves sometimes. That's what I admire.
Now for a few quick fire questions, just to round out. What do you like to do when you're not out campaigning?
I'm a bit of a gamer, actually. And older stuff at the minute. Is it GOG or something like that I've been introduced to recently, so I've managed to find a host of games that Dad used to have on the computer when I was a kid. Star Wars X-Wing is actually, I think the first edition is older than me, but it's still an awesome game. Big fan of Total War stuff as well. So yeah, bit of a gamer.
Excellent. Do you have a favourite food?
Steak, rare as you can get it. Like, if it's still twitching, perfect.
What do you think's the best show on TV right now?
Oh, nice. Does Netflix count? I must admit, Rick and Morty has been my switch off for the last couple of weeks. It's fantastic, mindless, silly television. I'm sorry, it's not something more highbrow.
Are you reading anything good at the moment?
I've picked up, I've not had time to keep on reading. I've forgotten who wrote it. It's Be Your Own Politician. It's written by it's one of the Labour advisors, I think, in the sort of early Blair years. I'm only in the first couple of chapters, but it's interesting talking about, and he does touch on the sort of soundbitey, media savvy, party stooge type politician. I'm finding that quite interesting. I've not read the end, so if it turns out he's advocating stuff that I don't agree with, don't hold me to that. I've not finished it. But that's what I'm reading at the minute.
Excellent. Well, that rounds everything out. Thanks for coming down, David, and all the best with the campaign.
Thank you.